I have a dream, like I'm sure many of you do, to maybe just one day build my dream home. While the chances of building it are low, it's still fun to think about. Heck, I've even drawn a few sketches of it. I purposely haven't put a budget to it because, well, I don't want to put a damper on the idea, but I do know it won't be cheap. That's why it's called a dream. The design of my ultimate abode has been inspired by stories I've read, pictures I've seen, technologies and materials I've discovered. It's come from my travels and interests in different cultures. It's from my want to be environmentally friendly and sustainable and not pay an electric bill. And it has to be cool. Like on a hot day, it needs to be really, really cool. Here's a brief synopsis. The house would be mainly in the ground. I got that idea from Lord of the Rings. Come on, Bilbo's house is so cool. And I'm on the tall side, like Gandalf tall, so of course a little more headroom would be required. The front of my home would face south and have floor-to-ceiling glass walls in the shape of a horseshoe. That's just a random idea. The back would be built into the side of a hill. The other walls would be made of rammed earth, an ancient building technique that's incredible for heat and moisture regulation. To cap it all off, a grass roof. I got that one from a trip to Norway. Scandinavians are huge into grass roofs, totally energy efficient, and they support wildlife. Scandinavians are so cool. I'd use locally sourced, sustainably made materials, cross-laminated beams and reclaimed timbers, local stone, local trades, simple but nice. It would be small, not just to keep costs down, but also to deter guests and, more importantly, kids from staying with me. They can camp on the grass roof. It will be nice up there with the bees and the butterflies. I'd love any combination of geothermal, microhydro, and solar panels so it's completely off-grid. I'd capture rainwater for the greenhouse, which would live in a solarium in the front horseshoe window feature. I just want to wake up next to the tomato I'd be eating for breakfast. I see a mini vertical farm that grows veggies all year long and a naturally regulated swimming pool that doubles as a fire suppression reservoir. The list goes on. I fantasize about this home, and I also fantasize about something else. What if we all lived in houses or buildings that were constructed with these shared ideas and values in mind? If we're going to dream, we might as well dream big. I'm Mitchell Scott, Editor-in-Chief of Kootenay Mountain Culture Productions, and this is the Headwaters, brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. In this episode, we're going to tackle the pressing issue of housing. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that housing is a human right. Yet around the world, and right here in the basin, people continue to struggle to find a place to live. Homeless people on the streets are the most visible proof that we don't have enough housing, but not so obvious are the college students and people with jobs who are couch surfing, living with their parents, or bouncing from one eviction to another. And then there are all those workers, tradespeople, service workers, healthcare workers, who would like to move to our region for a new job, but they can't. Whether there is no availability or what is available is too expensive, the Kootenays has a real and growing housing problem. But communities are starting to address the issue. Municipal governments in the basin are constantly under pressure from residents to build affordable housing. Until recently, cities and towns have kind of shrugged that off, saying, housing is not our job. We can't afford to build housing and we are not real estate developers. They say it is a provincial or federal issue, not a municipal one. But things are changing. Some towns and cities are figuring out ways to contribute, and we're going to take a look at two of those communities, one in the East Kootenay and one in the West. We'll call it A Tale of Two Towns. Reporter Bill Metcalf has this story for us. Hello, Bill. Welcome to the Headwaters.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about this.
We have a tale of two towns here, Rossland and Fernie, West Kootenay and East Kootenay. Let's start with some basics here. How much does it cost to buy a house in Rossland versus Fernie?
Well, the median list price as of July 2024 for a home in Rossland is $587,000, and in Fernie, it's $664,000.
That is some serious cash. So many people I know wonder about how our kids are going to secure housing as they age. At these prices, they're going to have to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Where should we start, Bill?
Well, I think we should head to Rossland first. Let's start on the street outside a large new building in town, a couple of blocks off the main downtown area. This past June, I arranged to meet two people there. I asked them to introduce themselves to the Headwaters listeners.
Hi, I'm Jan Morton, and I'm president of the Lower Columbia Affordable Housing Society.
And I'm Andy Morrell, the mayor of Rossland.
And the three of us are standing here in front of a pretty impressive-looking, quite new building. And it's a pretty special building, I understand. Where are we here? What are we looking at?
Well, we're looking at the front of City Hall on the ground floor, and we're looking at 3 stories of affordable housing above it.
I'm going to add to it that, to me, it represents a community vision in the sense of the ability of a capacity of different sectors within the community to work together to create something that makes a really big difference to the community.
Right. The building, which finished construction in 2023, is called Rossland Yards because the land used to be a railroad yard. It's a very attractive 4-story building with timber frame front facades. We went inside, and right there, just inside the door, is the new council chambers where the city holds its meetings. It's an open, bright, and inviting room.
We're pretty tickled with it. It's considerably more expansive, brighter, more accommodating for the public as well as council. And we've got lots of people walking in the door and saying, "Wow!"
And is that what you said when you walked in?
In fact, it is. I was really impressed. It has a really good feeling about it for a public space.
I've seen it outside when you drive by at the ski hill. It's a nice looking building.
Yes, it's a great looking building. Jan Morton and Mayor Morrell and I sat down in the council chambers to talk about the building. They told me that in 2018, the roof of Rossland City Hall collapsed, and they've been in temporary quarters ever since trying to figure out how to afford a new home for city council and staff. Meanwhile, Rossland employers in all sectors are frustrated because they need workers and they can't hire anyone from outside the area because there's nowhere for them to live.
It's a common narrative throughout the Kootenays and growing every year. So there was a need for housing and a need for a city hall. I think I'm starting to get the picture here.
Yes, and it just so happened that the city owns this piece of land. So the city had a need, which was a permanent space for a city hall.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. What's another advantage of having housing in the city hall?
Well, the physical location is fabulous for the housing. We've got a school, 2 blocks away, we had skate park, arena, all of that. So it's a wonderful location. In terms of co-location with the city, let's face it, people come in for various kinds of city services when people, so that it's incredibly accessible.
The fact that there were 2 separate needs, housing and a city hall, meant that they were able to bring in a variety of funding partners. It's a natural fit for BC Housing, which provides housing for low-income people but would never have funded a city hall. And it's a natural fit for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which funds municipal infrastructure as well as housing.
Sounds like an elegant solution.
It really was a win-win situation when we realized, sitting down at the planning stages, that there was a lot of synchronicity in what we were doing. BC Housing was excited.
And so was Columbia Basin Trust.
And Columbia Basin Trust as well.
Big investors as well.
The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has energy efficiency requirements with anything they fund. So this added another layer to the uniqueness of the building. The building has a high level of energy efficiency.
We've got a triple glazed glass, more insulation, outboard insulation on the exterior of the building. Every unit has a heat pump, mini split heat pump for both heating and cooling. Those probably wouldn't have been into the original design or built into the original construction without FCM requiring those higher standards. It's also solar ready. So when the day comes and the affordability of being able to add solar panels to the roof, it's ready for that.
But what about the people living there? Who is currently living at Rossland Yards?
The people who live up, the households upstairs are in some way linked to the workforce. That is clear. So first priority would be individuals who are in the Rossland workforce, although we do open it up as well to people in what we call the Lower Columbia region, which really extends from Rossland out to Fruitvale. And then there is some possibility for fairly recent retirees from the Rossland workforce as well. So that very much of a workforce focus.
Right.
So there aren't deeply subsidized units, unlike some of the other models of affordable housing. There is an assumption that people are working and have some reasonable income.
And is there an income limit?
Jan Morton told me that there is a range of income limits depending on family size and that prospective tenants' incomes are carefully vetted. She didn't give me the exact thresholds, but said that people living there, depending on their family size, do not have a family income of more than $120,000 a year, and many are far lower than that. But let's be clear that this is not housing for people with no working income. Experts these days have coined the term the missing middle, referring to people with moderate incomes who still can't afford or find housing.
Yeah, we hear a lot about the need for supportive housing and seniors housing, but really, housing is needed across all spectrums.
You're right, Mitch. The Rossland Yards project has been getting attention from other places. Andy Morell recently was asked to speak about it at the annual conference of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities.
Just recently, I attended the FCM conference in Calgary, annual conference, and they invited me to come and speak on this project with the fact that it is a literally groundbreaking project nationwide, and that we're getting recognition right across the country. And we're getting phone calls on a regular basis to say, how did you guys do this? And, can we borrow or steal the idea and do it elsewhere?
In fact, Rossland Yards has won several awards from municipal and planning organizations for this project. One thing that it's important to remember is that the Lower Columbia Housing Society, without whom this building would probably not be there, is a nonprofit organization run by volunteers.
I think you need to acknowledge with all of these projects the enormous investment of volunteer time. We estimated that we put in excess of 10,000 hours of volunteer time. I probably put in, I'm supposedly a retiree, I probably work 20 to 30 hours a week on this particular project.
Over how long?
Well, we started in 2017. Yeah. That's a lot of time. Now it's more so now than it was at the beginning, but you really have to have people, and it's not just me. We've got others on the board as well who put in extraordinary amounts of time, and they put it in because they're really proud of what's being accomplished, that they get excited to see what happens. When there is success, that attracts people.
So when you walk up or drive up the street here one of these days and you see this building, what do you feel?
Pride, incredible pride. I love it when I come in the side entrance or the entrance off the Slocan Street, which is into the housing, and people are coming and going, and we've been sort of flexible. We allow little dogs or cats in the building and some of those kinds of things. There's just a sense of family, a sense of connection, and I think I have huge pride there. And then I walk into the City Hall side and think, we did this together.
So that's the tale of one town, Rossland, beauty little mountain village with really good skiing. Tell us about the other town you visited, another beauty little mountain town with really good skiing too.
Yeah, I found another incredibly interesting project in Fernie. It's similar in that it involves a web of collaborations and partnerships, but of a different kind than in Rossland.
So what's their building like?
Well, this project has not broken ground yet. This will happen in 2025. I talked to Fernie's city manager, Michael Boranowski. He told me a little about the desperate housing situation in Fernie, not just for very low-income people, but for middle-income people as well.
We're needing to bring workers to the community or keep workers in the community, and they just have nowhere to live. So you do see people living in cars. You see RVs hooked up to water and power on the side of the road or in driveways. An RV resort that's booked, full to the gunnels all of the time. And just a demand that supply can't meet.
In Rossland, they are providing housing with a city hall. In Fernie, they're providing housing with a different matching need.
The project we're really excited to be part of is this provincial pilot project of combining affordable housing and childcare space. And so Fernie faces, as do many communities, but Fernie faces this dual challenge of huge demand for childcare spaces. A survey of the community indicates that we've got 300 or so children waiting for childcare spaces currently in our little community of 6,000 or so.
Their building will have 100 childcare spaces along with 12 affordable housing units for childcare educators. They would get first priority as tenants. There'd be a total of 27 units in the building.
Another creative housing solution. Sounds like there's a ton popping up all over the basin. Who's building this project?
Well, it's a creative partnership with a head-spinning list of players. The city is leasing the land for almost nothing to the Elk Valley Family Society, which will collaborate with the Elk Valley Childcare Society. BC Housing and the Ministry of Education are involved in funding. And also involved is the New Commons Development, a nonprofit real estate development company in Vancouver. And there's another really interesting player. It's called Nuco, that's N-U-Q-O, Modular, based in Vancouver.
Nuco is a Indigenous and woman-run and founded modular builder who does some phenomenal work that I've seen. Recently, or I guess a year ago, we were lucky enough to tour a new build that they put together on Squamish Nation lands by the Stanley Park Bridge. And council and I, who were lucky enough to get that tour, were blown away by the quality and attention to detail that's achievable with new modular building techniques, and the opportunity for a rapid intervention in housing or community service or space that's needed. They were attached to the project as it came to the city of Fernie as essentially the designer builder of the modular units.
Well, it sounds like we might be getting into that later on in the podcast, but a lot of players. And the process of building and development is not simple or straightforward. So is this making it more complicated?
It is complicated, and Michael Boronowski doesn't seem to mind. He enthusiastically agrees that it's taking a lot of work. And
it was intense. I was fortunate enough to have the support of council to dedicate significant time to it. And I love that. I love bringing people together and making things happen that make communities better.
So that's our tale of two towns. They both involve large buildings that cost a lot of money and have a lot of moving parts. There's no doubt that we do need large buildings if we're going to provide enough housing in the basin. But are there other ways of looking at housing affordability? Maybe it's not only a matter of what we build, but how. Could new technologies like modular building improve our ability to provide housing? And what if we changed our expectations about how much square footage we need? What if some of us decided to own land jointly instead of individually? Bill Metcalf talked to some very interesting Kootenay people who have out-of-the-box ideas when it comes to housing.
This current project we're working on right now, it's a 120 modular job in Montana for a workforce housing project. It provides 90 beds, and then there's kitchen, living quarters, mudrooms, storage rooms.
This is Chris Kolesnikoff of Kolesnikoff Mass Timber in South Slocan. Chris and I are in Kolesnikoff's huge manufacturing plant where they make modular building components. A module is one room or several rooms. It looks like a big box, self-contained, to be transported to a building site where many of them are joined and stacked together to form a complete building.
You can see there are 6-sided complete structures. We have all the insulation, cladding, windows and doors. Inside here you can see the washrooms are nearly done, carpets are in, electrical lighting's all done. So within a couple of days here, these are going to be package wrapped and then shipped to the job site, and we'll work on the next state.
They ship these individual box-like structures with all the wiring, plumbing, paint and finishing already in them to construction sites. There are some conventional tools here in this factory in South Slocan, but it's also very high-tech.
Everything that makes modular possible is your digital drawings, design, technicians. So that's a new step compared to a traditional single-family home where you get an architectural drawing, a little 2D, and the framer goes to towns to start to build this project. Everything here is digitalized and modeled to a 32nd of an inch.
Kalesnikov doesn't build modules for single-family homes. They apply this technology to larger buildings, like apartment buildings, industrial buildings, work camps, and schools. Chris says modular could be a quicker, and therefore perhaps cheaper, way of building an apartment building than the usual stick frame method. He says modular can create more certainty because it's done in a controlled environment and the quality can be higher, and the project is not subject to uncertainties like the weather and the availability of tradespeople. On a Saturday afternoon this past summer, I went to Kaslo to meet Jean-Marc Laflamme, who takes a different approach to modular building. His organization, Future Villages, promotes a variety of ecologically based housing that he refers to as regenerative living. He took me on a tour of an outdoor site where people are setting up tiny homes in a location loosely organized as the Back Road Eco Village.
This is a similar chunk of land that we're walking into where young people have moved into several acres, and they're just basically setting up their own low-cost housing. Most of them is tiny houses and little cabins, and they've taken shipping containers and campers, and you have a mixture of some prefabricated and DIY, and of course you notice there's a lot of food growing, so people are spending less on housing and more on food production.
I interviewed Jean-Marc in his office at the Kaslo Innovation Center. He told me people typically think of a tiny home as a 700-square-foot house on wheels. But he uses the term microhomes because small homes come in many forms. You can buy one on Amazon for $20,000, he says. Jean-Marc is one of the founders of a company called GeoShip, based in California, which is beginning to produce bioceramic geodesic modular domes. Even though they are operating in different worlds, Jean-Marc Laflamme and Chris Kalesnikov agree on a couple of things. Housing unaffordability exists because our construction methods are behind the times, and also our personal needs for housing space are inflated. Here's Chris and then Jean-Marc.
In our area, I think it's still far more common to have a single-family house than any other type of building site. And so as these new construction types and methodologies come into play, they're going to continue to kind of change the landscape of building types. And I think in these regional areas of ours here in the West Kootenays, you'll see more multi-story buildings, smaller living quarters, kind of almost changing like minimalistic type changes. So I think that's really going to be one of the ways to attack affordability. You're not going to be able to build a 2,500 or 3,000 square foot home and call it affordable. It's just the changing of times.
Indigenous pioneers, everybody used to build a lot smaller. We all of a sudden got ambitious, started building bigger, but what we didn't realize is that the cost of labor and materials went through the roof. So we still built big, and it got really expensive to the point where it's unsustainable at the moment. As you know, we have the average cost of a home around here is $1 million. The reason why we're in the housing crisis today is because we've built the same way for centuries. We have a bunch of people that show up on site and they set up a house. The car was made by robots since 1961. That's when the first robot started with GM. And to this day, we are still not making homes with robots.
Jean-Marc's company GeoShip is working with an automated process called injection molding, something like 3D printing. You won't hear the accustomed sounds of saws, hammers, or nail guns on those construction sites. Twente Additive Manufacturing is a company here in the Kootenays with its manufacturing plant just outside of Nelson in Procter. They started making 3D printed houses a few years ago, and we featured them on this podcast. But since then, they have grown a lot. They have offices in Europe and Dubai now, so we thought we would check back in with them. Twente's president, Ian Commission, told me people in the Kootenays and in BC in general don't want 3D printed houses. So his company manufactures the machinery to do the 3D printing and ships it to customers in Japan, Puerto Rico, and the U.S.
I think for people in the Kootenays to really buy into this, they just need to come and see what can be done. Right now, I think people are comfortable paying $500 to $700 a square foot for a timber structure with conventional building techniques, and we can build a house for around $300 a square foot. So, I think once they realize how much more bang they can get for their buck and how much quicker we can build a house, then I think realistically the markets can start taking off here as well too.
Let's visit Jean-Marc Laflamme at the Kaslo Innovation Center one more time. He says we need to break our habit of thinking about owning land as individuals. He promotes the idea of co-ownership and co-living, and he's working on a local project where a group of people will share a piece of land and build micro-homes.
One up in Cooper Creek here, a group of people come together saying, hey, we're going to co-own 28 acres of land. It's got a house on it, so we can leverage a mortgage, and we take that money and put it into low-cost infrastructure. So anything from a micro home to a composting toilet and a renewable energy system.
Remember, Jean-Marc said you can buy a home online for $20,000. If you moved from a $1 million home and spent $20,000 on housing, or even $50,000, he asks, what would happen if 100 people in the Kootenays did that?
It opens up tens of millions of dollars, unlocks from the mortgages to put in towards other critical life support systems, like food. Maybe you want to grow your own food. Maybe you want to make your own energy. Maybe you want to share mobility. You want to do all these things to crush the cost of living.
Imagine the housing landscape if we all started co-owning land and building homes together. What a kumbaya that would be. Some people are returning to multi-generational living to enter housing markets that are expensive and where vacancy rates are low. On her property on the outskirts of Nelson, British Columbia, Zoe Creighton and her husband decided to place not one, but 2 tiny homes on their property to support their family.
So we have 5 acres on Granite Road outside of Nelson, and we have a nice little 1920s farmhouse and a big shop that my sweetie John built shortly after we moved here, and he has all of his woodworking and lumber manufacturing tools in it. And it had always kind of been an idea of his to develop kind of part of the property. My preference is to embrace the nature with all of the 15 apple trees and fruit trees and all that. And I completely understand that we have a nice chunk of land and that housing is an issue. And it was kind of a responsibility, to not have too much land and people who were unhoused.
John's mother had just retired in Saskatchewan and was trying to figure out what to do next. A few months later, Zoe was talking to her daughter, Suki, who was living in Italy at the time and was kind of at loose ends and decided she wanted to move back too. So, long story short, that beautiful piece of land now has 2 tiny homes on it that house 3 generations instead of 1. It has helped everyone financially, and it points toward the possibility of a different future that is really kind of a return to the past. We'll let Zoe have the final word.
I think if we all were to look at that and see the benefits and kind of take a step back in history and realize that that is how we all supported each other, shared food, shared social networks, shared jobs like around the property, we'd realize that going it alone is not necessarily the best way to do it. I mean, we've all found ways of building our social capital and collaborative networks in our communities, but to do that from the basis of an intergenerational household or landhold, I think will have really good impacts on how we live together and how we interact in society.
And that's our podcast on housing how-to. A huge thanks to our reporter Bill Metcalf. To see more articles on housing solutions in the basin, check out headwaterspodcast.com. The Headwaters is created by Kootenay Mountain Culture Productions and brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. To find out more about all the good things the Trust does when it comes to supporting people and communities in the Columbia Basin, visit ourtrust.org. I'm Mitchell Scott. Thanks for listening.